Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Where do you want me?
You're over there. So basically, tonight we're going to hear Jordan's story of kind of, hear how he's been successful and how he's, doing the angel investing stuff now. And then basically what he wants to see from you guys, if you're looking at angel investing, before you come knock on his door, make sure you got all your stuff together the way he wants to see it before he tells you that you've done a very poor job and gets mad at me. So I'm going to give you the microphone. We're okay there, TK? And then at the end we'll have a few questions, whatever you're thinking, but hopefully along the way I'm asking the questions that you're thinking anyway, right?
You want to ask first?
Yeah, alright. So Jordan, yeah, good idea. Going back, please tell me a little bit about your background. Just tell me, what your education was. Was your father a businessman? Where did you start getting that entrepreneurial inspiration from? And then we're going to talk about your failures, your successes, and let's keep prompting you.
All right, well, first of all, thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you'll find it interesting. Talking about yourself is actually the hardest thing to do. But anyway, all right, my background. So, born and bred here in Melbourne. My family had their own businesses. So my grandfather, here's an interesting one, my grandfather had the agency for Polaroid in Australia and was doing really well until Polaroid decided it was time to come direct. And this is a perspective thing that I've had a chance to learn through life. These days, if you were in that situation, there would be all sorts of terms and conditions in the agency or distributor agreement that would make sure that you didn't get completely screwed over, only mostly screwed over. But in those days, the world just wasn't that sophisticated, contracts weren't that complex, and so when Polaroid decided to come direct, they just cut him out. They took all the hard work he'd done in the market, opened their own office, picked up all the contacts and kept going. So that was an interesting experience, but he was a very entrepreneurial guy. We also had the agency for a group called Berwick Batteries, which was out of the UK. Just made regular little batteries, but they were one of the biggest brands of the day. He had the contract and the secret recipe for Chellies. Who knows what Chellies are? Okay, so every time, artificial cherries. So every time you have a cocktail with a little artificial cherry, or you get a fruit cake with a little artificial cherry, or a cookie with a little artificial cherry, they're called Chellies. And there's a particular formula for that. And as you might expect if you stop to think about it, at some point it's a large vat of really ugly, smelly, red, gooey stuff that my father as a teenager used to have to stand there and stir. Okay. And once again, the people who owned that were actually much nicer. There was a private family in the UK. It was their invention. They had the worldwide business for it. And when they decided it was time to step up production in Australia, and my grandfather didn't want to build a whole massive factory, they came to an arrangement and he got a nice trail out of that. He also had a coffee plantation in Papua New Guinea. He built the first high-rise apartment buildings in Surfers Paradise, and a bunch of other things like that. So I guess there's been a sort of an entrepreneurial spirit in the family for several generations. My father had primarily it was a photographics business, both retail and wholesale. We were the first people to import the 1 hour photo labs. So if you remember back when cameras had film in them, and you used to go down to a shop that would actually develop them in 1 hour and give them back to you, we were the first people to bring that in. We carried most of the professional cameras, so all the in those days, the press had press cameras. They were usually very large format cameras, and we were the main people who imported those into Australia. So I grew up in an environment where around the dinner table, we spoke about business, just, sort of, I guess you could say I absorbed it, right? And what was interesting for me as I went on, my education was I'm an electronics engineer. I studied at RMIT before it was a university. It's a very fine university, but I think it was better before. If the government hadn't made the funding rules that it had to convert to a university, then it wouldn't have done that. I think that was a mistake by the government, but they make lots of those. That's their right. So that was quite interesting. And when I left university, my first job was with IBM. I was the only qualified engineer in the entire workforce of IBM in Australia, which I found really interesting, but it explains something that we all know, that for a lot of these big businesses, the Australian operation is just arms and legs. So in those days it was sales and marketing and technical support. What we used to call ourselves was board jockeys, because we literally would go in, open up the piece of equipment, find the board that had a possible fault on it, pull it out, replace it, everything's working, walk away. Put the board back into the system, it would get checked and refurbished and put back into the supply chain. So IBM was really interesting, but I was only there for about 8 months. Reason being that in our final year of study, a couple of my friends and I in engineering, 19 years of non-stop schooling, and all we could think of is how do we get off this continent and go do something somewhere else. So we went down to the Career Centre and applied for every scholarship, fellowship, internship, whatever we could find anywhere in the world. Of course, they were all in the Northern Hemisphere, and that meant that you had to wait for the 6-month offset to kick in, which is why we went out and got jobs. Now, a lot of my classmates went off and got jobs with big technology companies and stayed with those companies and did eventually get taken overseas for rotations in America or Europe or Asia, or all three. What happened to me is I got several offers to go overseas, but the one I ended up taking was to do postgraduate research fellowship in biomedical engineering, which was one of my final year areas of specialisation, at the Israel Institute of Technology, which is also called the Technion in Haifa. And that was fascinating. I developed I worked with a PhD candidate, and we developed a system to enable paraplegics to stand and walk under computer control. And if you're really interested in that, talk to me about it later. I'll tell you why it was significant. It was a lot of fun. Again, we're talking about a long time ago. There was a show on TV in those days called Beyond 2000, which some of the younger ones might have heard of, some of the older ones might have seen. I came home, and 18 months after I came home, I saw my project on Beyond 2000. And to top it off, the guy they were actually showcasing the stuff on, the paraplegic, was actually my cousin's husband who'd had a motorcycle accident. And so I was like, hey, quick, Mum, Dad, come in, see this, see what I've done. But it was interesting because it gave me a sense that you really can go and do something in one spot and sort of touch the world. I didn't come straight home. I took another year and a bit travelling all over Europe with a backpack, about this big, day pack, like the traditional Australian will do. I only came home because I pretty much had run out of money. But I travelled all over Europe and the United States. And I came home. What happened is I ended up getting a job with an engineering startup, literally a guy in his garage. A very dangerous garage because he didn't have the electricity grounded, so everything was live. And we were one of the first people in Australia to start using AutoCAD. If anyone knows the history of AutoCAD, it was AutoCAD version 1.3i, the I signifying international, and 1.267 or something was the first version they actually released outside the United States. So it really was the very beginning of using CAD in Australia at the PC level. And that's been a trend. I've always been involved in introducing something new. That led on, we actually merged with a 60-year-old electrical contracting company who needed an engineering capability, and they basically picked us because, I didn't find this out till many years later, but the MD told me they picked us because of me, because I had the mix of skills. And also, coming back to your question about family and where the entrepreneurial thing came from, the MD came to me after I'd worked there for about a year, and he said, look, I'm really impressed because you have a proprietary attitude. You act as if this company was your company. You treat customers as if they're your customers. You treat staff as if you're responsible for them. And I didn't know any other way, to be honest, so I didn't know what was so special about it, but it stuck with me ever since. And he was a great mentor, that managing director. He really took care of me. We did a number of really interesting projects. I introduced, who knows what thermography is? Not many. Okay, it's you've heard of infrared cameras. You've probably seen them. So if you take an infrared camera and you shine it at an electrical switchboard, so you go down to the basement of this building somewhere, there'll be big grey cabinets, and that's where all the heavy-duty electricity comes into the building and gets distributed. The way you'd normally service those things is you turn all the power off, so it's safe to touch them, and then you try and mechanically test whether or not they're working. Not a great system, but it was the only system available, and it tends to result in you creating as many errors as you find. Because every time you go in and check things, you knock something else without noticing it. And when you multiply that with a big skyscraper complex or a ship at sea, you get some very interesting situations. So, and that was some of the work that we were doing. So I introduced a system where you take an infrared camera and you want the system, the electrical system actually not only to be turned on but working the way it normally would. And then you scan it and interpret the image to find out where there might be faults. There were other people doing that, so we went the next step and we solved a problem for another name from the past. Some of you might have remember a thing called Ansett Airlines. And airlines have a real problem. They can't adequately detect the maintenance that they have to do in an aircraft in many respects, which is why they have high frequency pre-planned maintenance. And that's a very expensive thing to do with machinery. And one of the biggest problems they have that they can't detect is metal fatigue. The metal fatigue happens particularly in the wings because when you go up in the atmosphere, everything freezes. And as we know, ice is an expansion from the water state. So you go up, the little sections inside the wings all freeze, you get pressure on them. By the time they land and pull up at the gate, most of that water has melted, most of that ice has melted, and they can't actually tell. And we showed them that we could go along with the infrared camera and walk along underneath or on top of the wings while the passengers are getting on and off. And their engineers could then look at those thermographic images, those infrared images, and actually see where the ice had formed and which sections were likely to be under stress. And they could actually plan their maintenance on actual data rather than just guessing at what the manufacturer said they should do.
Sorry, so did this become big government contracts for you?
For us, it turns out no, which was, well, for various reasons, but mostly because Ansett started to have troubles. But we did it for Ansett, we did it for Air New Zealand in New Zealand. We were the first company in the world to get Lloyd's of London to certify it so that insurers would actually accept it as an inspection process. And we were the first company in the world to get Lloyd's to certify it for the electrical inspection on ships, which Lloyd's are specialists in. So again, we did lots of firsts. But the other reason, I guess, is because we got distracted by other business opportunities. So I moved on and led the team. Well, first of all, we got acquired by a Dutch-based multinational, and particularly an engineering company who have been doing, they've been doing the control systems on ships ever since electricity was invented, and before that they used to do the rigging. So for several hundred years they've been doing the control of ships in particular.
Can you go through, just for the group, a bit about the acquisition? How did you...
So the way that worked is they had someone who had worked in that company, a Dutch guy who had retired to Australia, and they wanted to buy a company in Australia because they did a lot of defence work. That was in the early days of the planning for the Australian submarine project, and you needed to have an Australian company if you wanted to bid for work in those big projects. So they were looking to acquire a company to enable them to do that, so they gave him that task. He found our company, and again, I didn't find out till many years later that ultimately the decision to buy our company versus any of the others was because I was there. Because what they needed was the type of mix of engineering and business skills and multi-systems skills and computer skills, which were pretty rare in those days. So, yeah, so we got that. By the time they acquired us, the submarine project had come and gone, mostly because there was a change in specification of submarine that made it more suitable for the Swedish rather than the Dutch model. But the Anzac ship project, which is our frigates that we have now, that was coming down the pipe. And so we led the tendering on that. So I spent 2 years basically living out of a hotel in Sydney, and furnished apartment for some of the time, and a lot of time in other parts of the world, but leading a project where we spent over $2 million just preparing our tender for our part of that project, which at the time was the biggest project in the world. It was a $5 billion project. Our share of it was about $500 million. Ultimately, and that was with the Newcastle-based syndicate. Ultimately, it was the Williamstown syndicate that won the contract. At which point, I said the managing director of that company had been a good mentor to me. He came to me and he said, Jordan, I think you've outgrown this company. I mean, now that we don't have this big defence project, I don't know what you're going to do. You've got all this experience, you've got all this international connections, you've got all this high-tech stuff, and we're going to go back to putting wiring in buildings and making industrial factories work and all sorts of things like that.
Sorry, so you spent 2 years on this tender, didn't get it.
Yeah.
What did that feel like? You know what I mean?
For me, it didn't matter at all. I thought it was great. I mean, I would have been happy either way. I had a fantastic experience, enormous learning experience. I think the president of the Dutch company, who I was working directly to, was more than a little disappointed and probably had some hard questions asked at the board level. But we were just our component. We were the platform control system, they called us, of the whole ship. We had war mods who were in there with the defence control systems, and Ansett Technologies, which is a special part of Ansett, who were in there with part of the system. So they were very big companies and multinational companies in the whole consortium.
Before you take it a bit further too, can I just take you one step back? And you talked about Israel and biomedical technology. Is there still a tie there? Like, I've seen that these guys are really innovative in terms of, like I just saw the other day, they had non-obtrusive surgery.
Right. So you mean a tie with Israel or a tie with biomedical?
Israel and biomedical specifically, and invested in that area of things?
Okay. So a tie with Israel, well, yes. So to make it really clear, I'm Jewish. So going to Israel had other reasons as well as just because it was a fantastic research opportunity. So I really enjoyed living there and I learned a lot about it. At the time, there was probably a chance I was going to stay there, but life just got too busy and I didn't really stop there or anywhere else for quite a long time. So I still have an interest, absolutely. In terms of biomedical, look, I'm still interested. I haven't actually invested in something in that space directly, but one of my favourite investments is in a Melbourne company who developed a technology, and their launch market is in biobanking. That's storing all those tissue samples and fluid samples that people have. So all that fancy stuff you see on CSI, and there's actually a whole real world about that, even though CSI is mostly fantasy. But biobanking, I think biobanking in the US, they're storing 10 million new samples every week. There are people like Johnson & Johnson who have the largest biobanking facility. I think the main building is a little over a hectare. Right? And they're filling that up faster than they can build the next building. And the guys here in Melbourne have come up with a technology, and a lot of that gets stored in cryogenic storage. A lot of it just goes in regular fridges and everything in between. But the cryogenic storage is a massive problem because electronics doesn't survive in extreme temperatures, high or low, or radiation. And this Melbourne company have developed a technology based around MEMS, that's micro electromechanical systems. Do people know what that is? Shall I explain that? Really quickly. There's a screen, you've got a projector throwing up on the screen. If you look on the side of the projector, you'll probably see DLP, Digital Light Projection. That's a brand name from Texas Instruments, and it represents the chip that actually makes the picture arrive. And that was the first major deployment of MEMS technology, even though the technology itself had been around for 20 plus years. This is what happens with technologies. And what that chip is it's a chip, so it's micro. There are all these little pyramids in a grid, and on top of each pyramid is a little mirror. And at the base of each pyramid are a couple of wires. So you send an electrical signal along the wires, that's the addressing, and you get to the particular grid address, and that electrical signal causes the pyramid to tweak in a certain way, which moves the mirror in a certain way, which is basically a pixel, and as a result, you get a certain amount of light projected onto the screen in a certain way.
So that's not complicated at all.
So It's electrical mechanical systems. That's what it's about. These guys, basically what they've done is they've replicated an RFID chip. So you do know what RFID is? Anyone not know what RFID is? All right, I'm not going to explain it then. I mean, this is your chance. If I ask a question, you don't put your hands up, then I'm just going to go whichever way I want. They emulate RFID, so basically what they've done is they've made a little microscopic mechanical tuning fork. Right? So you just send an acoustic signal to it and it vibrates and repeats the signal back. And that vibration can be interpreted. It's currently running, I think, if I remember correctly, at 32 bits of digital information are stored in that vibration. So it's unique identification, temperature sensing, and one other aspect. So you can take that chip and put it in something that's going to be frozen or heated or put in space where cosmic radiation destroys electronics, and it will survive. In fact, it won't only survive at the cryogenic temperatures because it's metal. Metal is a crystalline substance. In cold, crystalline substances align more strongly and vibrate more cleanly, so it actually not only survives but operates even better in cryogenic temperatures than it does at room temperature. So these guys have the only solution in the world to solve, among other things, the tracking of samples in cryogenic storage of biobanking. Nobody else has a solution that actually works. So if any of you get involved in IVF, let me just tell you, it's really scary when you go into the IVF labs and find out how they keep track of everything. And that's also why they ask you for so many eggs, because just in case one of them gets mixed up in a mix-up, they want to have lots of backup so that you don't get into trouble. So it's not a medical company, no. It's a technology company, but its first major launch is in a medical space. So long-winded answer, I'm sorry. No,
well these guys they're operating on people without cutting, without.
Yeah, that, I'm not sure what that would be. There is some very clever laser-based surgery going on and ultrasonic. So laser, you're cutting, but through tiny little holes. Ultrasonic, you don't have to break the skin because you can reach through with the signal. So it's sort of, right. Yeah, so for things like breaking up tumours.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, my father has Parkinson's.
Okay.
And that's why I happened to be researching this company from Israel, and I just thought it was amazing. So, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and that's almost certainly a direct benefit of their strong defence technology, because understanding how to control vibrationary signals in a whole lot of communications and defence technologies is key. So, does that mean that we can't come up with it? No, but I'd rather live here than live in a war-torn state. So there are pros and cons to everything. Where do you want me to go next?
You lost the tender. Sounds like you're on these big contracts. Go on.
Let me try and cut through. I don't want to try and give you my entire life story. I did something during my working career that was not very common in my age group, but is quite common since. On average, over the first 15 years, I worked for 13 different companies, in 13 different roles in 11 different companies. So my average tenure was just a little bit under a year, or a little bit over, rather, a year at each company. Now, that's average. Some of them were shorter, some of them were longer. And that was also very natural to what I was doing as an engineer, working on a lot of projects. You tend to get to the end of a project and it's time to move on. And in Australia, one of the problems was, as I described with the MD who came to me, that all too often, once you got to the end of a project, that company wasn't going to have another project of that type anytime soon, because the market's just too small. And so there was a natural tendency to move on. And I've had an international piece to everything I do since I was a kid. So I really enjoy that, and I've built a lot of international relationships. And so when I left that engineering services firm, and there were a bunch of other things I introduced to Australia. So talking about startups, and entrepreneurship, I am certainly addicted to starting things. I can't help myself. I see a good opportunity to start something, and I start something. A social group. I came back from living in Israel. I wanted to meet people, particularly women. I wasn't having much success, so I started a whole new social group. I only had one purpose: get a whole lot of women of the right age and type into a room so I could meet them. And then I had the first event, it was a huge success. Everybody wanted to come to the next one. I had the second event, it was a huge success. I was starting to meet some people, and then I got this invitation, well, this instruction from the company I was working for that I was going overseas. And I was going to be overseas for like 3 months or 6 months or longer. So I just had to turn around to the people who'd helped me and say, it's all yours, go for it. They turned it into something else, which I would never have done, but that's what happens. We just give it to them, and it's up to them what they do. So I did lots of different things, which did end up with me
going to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, joining a startup in Silicon Valley, so in today's terminology, co-founding a software startup in real-time visual simulation software tools. What does that mean? Well, I left out the 3D part, which is also important. Imagine what a flight simulator is. I mean, a real flight simulator, the ones pilots train in. That's real-time 3D visual simulation. So it happens in real time. It is a full 3D experience, and it's simulated experience. And of course, it's visual and audible, and in fact sensory, because there's usually a motion base as well. So what actually happened was I was running an engineering services firm here as CEO. So take one step back. I got to a certain point and I was thinking, what do I do now? Maybe I should do that MBA thing everyone's talking about, because I'm an engineer and I've done the equivalent of master's level research, or in fact PhD level research, even though I didn't wait to get the degree. But I know stuff about business, but I don't have the formal part of it. So I applied to a whole bunch of business schools in the United States, and while I was waiting, I got the opportunity to be the CEO of a company that was only a few months old and had got in trouble because it had tech founders who didn't know how to run a business. But they wanted someone who'd run the business who understood the tech. So they ended up asking me to come along, and I was then confronted with an issue. Go overseas for a couple of years, have an enormous amount of fun, pay an enormous amount of money to learn about what you're supposed to do. Or spend a couple of years getting paid a decent amount of money, having a different kind of fun, and learn by actually doing it. So I chose that one. When I left there, I built one of the last projects I did there was building a driving simulator for the state of Victoria, for the TAC. So it's a competitive international tender. Through my work in the defence and aerospace world, I knew everyone in Australia who did simulation in those days. They were all tied up with big companies, and the TAC came to us and said, we want another consortium to tender for this project, because we've got 2 and we want to have at least 3. Would you form another one? So we did. So we reached out and we found some clever startups in Silicon Valley who really knew what they were doing, and we put together our tender and we won. And then subsequently, or around about the time that was all happening, I ended up leaving the company here and joining one of those companies, the software company in the team, to help build the company, particularly internationally.
Hang on, so this is interesting to me because it's always Australians going to Silicon Valley to make money. You were using Silicon Valley people to make money here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's no question. And they were too. They were saying, there's no project like this anywhere else in the world. This is the hallmark project. Whoever wins this is going to get a run on to projects in the rest of the world. And that's, to all intents and purposes, that's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for the Australian company. One of the reasons I left is I had a big issue with my business partner, so I didn't want to go to jail and he was doing things that were illegal. So I left, and he continued to be a bad manager. So even though he got that project, he didn't run it very well, he didn't make a profit out of it, and he wasn't able to keep the business going. He never went to jail, by the way. I'm not even sure what happened to him. But that's certainly life. If you have business partners, you have good ones and bad ones.
Is that what, because he can hide some stuff in the tender? I'm just interested.
Oh yeah, what? Okay, I'll tell you one explicit thing that was absolutely illegal, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. If you do government tendering, there's a time at which the tender is due. It used to go into what was called a tender box. There's online versions of that these days. But that meant there was a big box, and you took your big wad of paper and you put it in the box, and the box had a big padlock on it. And after 4 o'clock on the 11th, they took the box away, and that was it. You couldn't do anything more. It was now going to look at all your paperwork and make their decision. He knew someone in the department, and he found out from that person that we were the cheapest bid by a country mile. And he figured we could ask for more money and still be the cheapest. And there were two things about, so he did that. He got his friend to allow him to submit some pages to be exchanged for the pages that were there. And he did all of that without telling me until after the fact.
Right.
And that got me on two main things. One, that was blatantly illegal and literally something to go to jail for, because that's defrauding the government. And two, he'd changed it so that all of the increased price transferred into profit for our company. And yet our consortium of little companies had all agreed to do this project on a cost recovery basis, because we wanted to win it and take the upside of what comes next. So he'd screwed all of our partners as well. So at that point I just said, look, I'm not going to go to jail for the crime that you've committed, and I'm not going to screw people over. That's not how I do business. So I walked.
Right.
And then what happened was the software company said, and I had to contact them all and say I couldn't tell them the whole story because that also wasn't really professional, but I told them, look, something's happened, I've left the company, good luck. I'm not going to be running the project. So the guy from the Silicon Valley software company, which he started in his garage a few months earlier, called me up at 1:30 in the morning, because Americans never figure there's a time difference anyway, and said, look, I'd never poach from a partner company, but if you're not there anymore, have you ever considered coming to live and work in California? And I said, well, of course I have. And so that was the beginning of a process which saw me joining the founding team. I think I was the third person in the company, and over the next 5 years we built the company from zero to about $5 million in revenue. The target for me was to get international revenue to be roughly 50%. When I left, we were running around about 40%, so definitely on track.
And in terms of international, what, Australian focused?
No, I moved to California and I looked after the whole world.
Oh, you
Well, actually, I looked after the whole world wearing the hat of strategic relationships. So I mean the whole world, including the United States. And I looked after the whole world outside the United States for developing customers and sales and distribution.
Sure, but I meant it was like you obviously had your foot in the door with Australian companies. I thought that would have been your likely first sales.
So there were two ways. The way it first started is while we were talking about it, I agreed to represent them in Australia and see what I could do. So I laid a lot of groundwork, but they weren't quite ready to sell at that point anyway. Software wasn't really fully developed yet. But I laid a lot of groundwork, used a lot of my connections, let people know I was going to be associated. So people at DSTO, the Defence Science and Technology Organisation, who do a lot of simulation work, which is what this software was, I let them know, and they later on became my customers. I can tell you funny stories about that too.
Well, I'd like to hear one of them.
Or one of them. Okay, so after I'd been in the States about 3 years, there's one, as there are in many niche industries, there was one major worldwide, held in Florida, in Orlando, one major conference, trade show, exhibition for the simulation industry. And everyone who was anyone had to be there. So we were there, we had our biggest stand ever, and all the time I'd been in the States, the Americans were all telling me, you've got to get harder, right? You've really got to learn how to sell. And I thought I was doing pretty well, they were telling me I was doing pretty well. So we're at this big trade show, and my Australian customers turn up because they've come to check it all out. And they come see me on the booth, and I sort of relax inside. I go, oh wow, I'm not going to have to do the full-on American thing here. I can just chat to them. So we're at a display stand in the middle of the booth, and I was talking to them and saying, hi, how are you guys? And just telling them about our latest stuff. And after a few minutes, they say, Jordan, you can stop. It's us. You can quit with the hard sell. And that's what happened. The whole stand, all the staff on the stand broke out in laughter, and the guys from Australia couldn't figure out what it was. And And I had to explain, well, the fact is I'm not giving you the hard sell. And they're all laughing because they know I'm not giving you the hard sell because I've actually relaxed with you guys. So I had migrated my performance somewhat to that model at that stage. The worst thing you can do is compare. If you compare with home, wherever home is, everything else will come up worse. And you know what? Maybe that's not true if you grew up in the worst part of Eritrea, but even there, home represents family, childhood. These are things that by the time you get to be an adult always have a rosy glow. So comparing with home is a really bad way to go if you want to learn to exist in another environment. And so, yes, Australia has massive cultural problems. I have a book I haven't finished writing yet called Australian Cultural Poppies, Cultural Barriers to Business Success. And obviously there's the tall poppy, there's the foreign poppy, there's what I call the dead poppy. So there's a bunch of them, and it's all about these stupid things that for some reason we insist on burdening ourselves with. And a lot of them, there are better behaviours in other parts of the world, including the United States.
Okay, so you had the accent. I'm sure it was helping close some sales for you.
Yep.
You did embrace, I guess, in somewhat of the the American leadership style with some things that you adopted, right? I'm guessing. That's what I like to. I was trying to make the point that I like the style of leadership. Anyway, you're in Silicon Valley. You close. People like that you're Australian. How did we get to the angel investors bit?
Right. So that's a good question. I will say one thing though. Actually, what I did was I took them Australian leadership. So I left an Australia that had some of the best management in the world. When I left Australia, Australian businesses were amongst the best managed in the world. And I'd been lucky enough to work in an environment where I'd experienced that. A good example, we needed to have a particular meeting with the president of a very large company. The Americans in my company were going, how are we going to do this? And I said, well, you pick up the phone and you call him and you ask him for an appointment. We're actually going to invite him to a very fancy lunch in a private room. They said, well, how are we going to do that? I said, I'll show you. And I picked up the phone and I called and I spoke to his secretary, of course, and she said, oh, yes, Jordan, yes, we know who you are. And, oh, I'm sorry, he's overseas. I said, oh, well, is the vice president there? Yes, he is. Well, perhaps the vice president would be willing to come. She said, I'm sure he would. Let me speak to his PA for you. So, long story short, it happened. And when I hung up the phone, the American team was standing around my desk, their mouths falling to the floor, because to them he was the top of the pedestal, and they couldn't. I'm taking the Australian view. He puts his pants on one leg at a time, I guess. He's just a guy. That's something Australians have that is incredibly powerful. And the other thing we have that's very powerful is initiative. An initiative is a little bit different to entrepreneurship in a broader sense. The initiative is to get up and get it done. Just give it a go and make things happen. And that's why I believe that's one of the key things that's driving this explosion of entrepreneurship in Australia, because the first step of entrepreneurship is to get up and give it a go. The second step is to get knocked down and feel that you can get up and try it again. Yes, if you want to call it pivoting, you can call it pivoting, but you know what, long before that book was written, that was going on. It just had other labels. But it's great that there's new terminology, and it's great that a new guy gets to get a book to his name. So how does that all connect to angels? So it goes like this. In Silicon Valley, we were bootstrapped, profitable, San Jose Mercury News, fastest growing 50 company. And all the time I'd been there, we'd had these strange guys knocking on the door saying, I want to give you some money. And we'd go, great, which products do you want to buy? No, I want to give you some money. What do you mean? I'm a VC, I want to give you some money. Right? We don't want your money, we want you to buy our products, we want customers. No, well, go away, we don't need you. Right? When I first got there, I didn't know very much about VC. By the time I left, I knew quite a lot. We got to the end stage where we got an unsolicited acquisition offer. It was a low-ball offer, as such things usually are, but it got us thinking, and we ended up going out to look for VCs as part of a whole new strategy to get ourselves purchased. And then subsequently to that, I left. But around about that time, I knew a lot of the companies in the Valley. I had pretty good networks, and I knew about a company that was doing really well and was in a nice, sexy space, and I was sure that something was going to happen for them. And I was single, I was earning good money. Everyone around me was doing things like putting a bit of money into companies. No one had a name for it, it's just what you did. Mostly they were putting them into listed companies, right? Well, Apple wasn't the hot shot, but Silicon Graphics, which was our hardware partner, their stock was going up and up. And I saw this other one and I had the opportunity, so I put some money into it. That was an angel investment. I didn't know it at the time, I didn't know the terminology at the time. In the early days I used to say, oh, I'm a VC. Now I won't say that in quite the same way. That was the beginning of it. That ended up, I invested at 2 cents a share. I sold a large chunk of those shares, the majority of them at $2 a share. So that's what got me hooked. And it's sort of what set me up to want to do more of that. And the sale happened after I'd relocated to Australia. My first angel investment in Australia, actually I was the only investor ever in that company, and after 10 years the founder came to me and said he'd like to buy me out because he wants to try and do something really different and risky, and he didn't want to risk my interests in that, which was perfectly reasonable. So we came to an agreement and I got a 34 times return on that investment. So my first angel investment and my first angel investment in Australia both worked out really well, albeit that it takes time, which it sometimes does. And along that journey, when I came back to Australia, I said Australia really needs venture capital, because I got to know venture capital quite well in the Valley, and I'd had a friend at a tier 1 VC say to me just before I left the Valley, right now in your career, you're basically you're the perfect profile for a Silicon Valley VC person. Technical background, lots of good experience, operational experience, serial entrepreneurial experience, some failures, some successes, the whole mix. And reasonably good at transferring the learning you got from that to other people so that they can benefit from it. Because that's fundamentally what a VC should be. Someone who can help the company succeed. The money is incidental. I came back to Australia, VC wasn't being done very well. Most of those firms still exist and most of them still aren't doing it very well. None of the institutionally backed VCs in Australia have produced a positive return on their funds. I didn't think I was going to be able to get into the market, but subsequently I met a guy who became my business partner, and we were able to get some private investors to give us a small amount of money. We ran a small VC fund here in Melbourne. Our goal was to prove that venture capital could be done better and faster than it was being done. We proved that goal. After 5 years, we exited our fund. We delivered an 8 times return to our investors, and coming back to the tall poppy, because we were successful, the institutions wouldn't give us a fund. And if you want to know the detail of that, I can discuss it later. And I could see the writing on the wall, but I'm saying, but there's got to be something else we can do to support and grow the early stage sector. And let me just stop there and say why. Why is that important? Because it's the early stage high growth companies in every economy that deliver sustained valuable growth. All right? In Australia, we're really lucky. We've got a strong resources sector, a strong financial services sector, a good education sector, pretty good agricultural sector, and even a pretty robust retail sector. That's all what gives us the strong foundation and stability that we enjoy. It's what makes it so that we actually don't have a great sense of urgency here, which is perhaps something that's a hindrance rather than a help. But the net growth does not come from a strong foundation, it comes from the margin. So there was a study done in the United States over a 25-year period finishing in 2007 that showed that all net job growth in the United States came from companies that were less than 5 years old and had fewer than 20 employees. Right? In other words, high growth startups. That's where all net job growth came from. Where does wealth generation come from? New companies, new jobs. That's what it's about. That's why I think it's important. And yes, I'm on a soapbox now. That's why I decided we needed an angel community in Australia. So I set out to make that happen. There was no organised angel community. There was in fact only one angel group in Australia when I first started working on this, and that was a group here in Melbourne. Some guys who had tried to get others interested back in the late 80s, early 90s. No one was interested. They went back to the underground dinner club type model. They have made themselves extraordinarily wealthy. They already were wealthy, but they've done really well out of their investing. When they disbanded about 4 or 5 years ago, the youngest guy at the table was, I think, 76 or something like that. So when I got the whole new generation stuff going for angels, they said, great idea, been really good sort of advisors to me, but we're not coming out of the woodwork anymore. We had our shot, no one wanted to hear about us, we're too old to do that now.
But things are still slow, right? I mean, I heard, what's his name, Stuart from Adventure Capital saying the same thing. Australians are happy to put money into property, into mining. All these resource stuff is gonna dry up. Put some money in tech. Still slow to do that, right?
Yes, at a national level, yes, we're not doing as much as we should be doing.
And that's because
we're doing way more now than we used to.
Yeah, because we're risk averse.
Well, it's not so much risk averse. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. There is a big part of the fact that there is no sense of urgency as a community, right? You can just buy BHP shares and you'll do okay. You know, maybe not if you buy Telstra shares, but you have to wait longer. So there is this challenge of not having a lot of urgency, and there is a challenge that you can still get a decent job in Australia and live a good life. Maybe you can't buy your own home anymore, but in most of the big cities anyway. So things are changing, but there's not a lot of urgency and there's not a lot of competition. Now, I think 4 million people in Melbourne is great. The government wants us to be 8 million people in the not too distant future. I think it's going to be a horrible experience to live here when it's 8 million people. So I don't really want that to happen, but I wouldn't mind if 4 million people set up 2 other 2 million people cities in regional Victoria. And we're the most urbanised country in the world. Right? 98% of the population live in cities. You take Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, you've got 50% of the population of the country in 3 cities. It's a very different dynamic. It affords us, by the way, for a lot of the things that you guys are doing, it affords us a fantastic platform because our population is so concentrated and so urbanised. So if you're building a model of a business that's trying to do something that's in an urban context, then Australia's a great place to get that started. New York, Paris, London might be the place to take it to the sky, but you can actually get that business model working here, because even though we have a small population, we have very big cities. Okay? There's only, I don't know what it was, last time I checked, I think a dozen or 13 cities in the United States bigger than Melbourne. Right? And that's gone up a lot. It used to be that there were only 5 or 6 cities in the United States bigger than Melbourne. So the world is full of medium size, lots of medium size, lots of spread density. Australia has a very different spread.
Can I, to put it kind of back to the audience and stuff, so you had a little bit of success with a couple of your first, your first steps into the VC world and your angel investing. Now with what you're working on right now, what does it mean to the audience and guys that are bringing businesses to you? Are you investing in, say, 10 businesses at around 200K a year? What is Melbourne Angels doing now? And then what do these guys have to have, in terms of a good story to come bring to you that would get you excited about?
So Melbourne Angels is currently probably not investing at that rate, although other angel groups are. So Brisbane Angels is probably the best angel group in the country, and South East Queensland is probably the most active early stage community in the country. It's not the biggest, but I would say that's in Melbourne. If you listen to the Deloitte survey done by the people in Sydney, then it's in Sydney. It doesn't really matter. So Brisbane and Sydney Angels are both investing at the rate of about 10 deals a year.
And sorry, before you even do that, sorry, can you just explain to everyone the difference between venture capital, raising venture capital, and raising angel investment?
Sure. Okay. So let's go back. Who is an angel investor? An angel investor is a private person investing their own money and their own time in making a business grow, a high growth business. How is that different to VC? A VC is a hired person getting paid usually reasonably well to manage somebody else's money on a fixed mandate. So the standard model for a VC fund is a 10-year fixed life fund, 5 years to make new investments, 5 years to harvest, during which you can't make any new investments, only follow-ons. The standard model is 2% of the committed capital is the management fee, so 20% of the capital is gone, but you still have to generate a return for it. So VC is a very hard thing to do. Let's get that really clear. It's only done well in 4 places in the world as a community, and that's California, Boston, New York, London, and Israel. Everywhere else in the world, they have exactly the experience we have here. Everywhere else in America, they have exactly the experience we have here. And even in Silicon Valley, only the top 3% of VC firms make a return on their funds. That's why, if you go around the room and name all the VC firms you know in Silicon Valley, you probably just name the ones that make money. And there's all these others, the other 97%, who you haven't heard of. And the reason you haven't heard of them is they probably don't get they certainly don't get a third fund. They might get a second fund because the decision is still out on the first fund, but at the time that you raise a second fund. So because of that mandate, if you've got a $100 million fund, you've got $80 million to invest, you have a team that's probably only 3 people, maybe 4 people. A VC team is inverted. You want to have maybe 1 admin person and 3 really, really experienced people who can really help companies. So you're looking for a very heavyweight team, and they'd like to get paid something reasonable, although the reward should ultimately be in what's called the carry, in the profit that the fund makes by having successful investments, successful exits. And you've got $80 million, you've got 5 years to make those investments. Ideally, you probably want to make them faster than that. You're probably out of 80 million, you're probably going to say, well, certainly if in Australia, you might say, well, I'll notionally allocate $8 million per investment so I can make 10 investments. So I come along and then I find your company and I say I'm going to invest $2 million in your company, but in our partnership in the fund, we've just allocated 8. So 8's been taken off the table. We've put in 2. If things go well, we're going to follow it with another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 up to the 6. If things don't go well, and it's still in the 5 years, we take that extra 6 back, put it back in the pot and try and find something new to invest it in. So there's a whole science and model to how VC works, and if you're going to try and raise VC funding, you should understand it. You should understand that individual partners in a VC fund have particular expertise. You need to find the right partner in the fund. You need to understand that they're all taking a risk on every investment, which is why they make collective decisions, because the goal here is not the salary that they're making. Now, the very biggest VC fund in Australia, the principals are making, well, they're getting paid over $500,000 a year, and they're taking profits out of their management company. Those 2 things alone would basically get them lynched in the United States. And in the .com bust, it did get people lynched, right? Because they'd taken these massive funds, they were paying themselves ridiculous amounts, creaming the money out of the system, and the investors in the fund were getting nothing. They were losing their money. So you do need to understand the structure and the business model of the investment, of the investor. So that's VC, and again, there's a lot more to know. Angel is private. You're an entrepreneur, right? If you're an entrepreneur, most people think you're just a little bit crazy. Even your family and friends. They're going, what? You're going to change the world? You're going to build an empire? You're going to do this? What? That may be nice, they may even give you some money, but the truth is they think you're a little bit crazy, okay? Now, go the next step. You're one of these crazy people, right? And then somebody comes along and says, hey, I've worked really hard and I've made some money that I could spend on my wife, on my kids, on a holiday. I could stick it in the bank in Australia and get really good interest. In most of the rest of the world, of course, you can't get interest because they've crapped out their economies. But in Australia, I could even do that. And instead, I'm going to take this money and give it to you when I know full well that the chances are you're going to fail and I'm going to lose my money. So if you're not at least touched by that same craziness, it's just not going to happen, right? So that's the profile of the ideal angel. A serial successful entrepreneur who has made their money by taking a risk and sees the opportunity to participate without actually having to do the really hard yards of being the management team, all right, of being the founder. I sometimes put it like this: the founder is the guy who's Atlas with the world on his shoulders, and what the angel wants to do is try and lighten the load, all right? But we're not going to step in and take control, because then we might as well just do it ourselves, in which case we don't have to give you the money, and frankly, there's plenty of good ideas, we don't need your idea either. So execution is the primary risk of any early stage business. Execution is all about people. So angel investing, by definition really, angel investing is early stage investing, really early stage, not what some other sorts of investors call early stage. So I'm talking about pre-revenue companies, early revenue companies, not, well, come back to me when you've got $10,000 a month of revenue, right? That's not what I call early stage investing. If you're going to do that, then you have to align yourself with the founder's team. Also, we're not, the company, if it's an early stage company like that, you don't have a lot of value, so you can't take a large amount of money. And you shouldn't need a large amount of money, and angel investors don't invest in capital intensive businesses. So up until the last few years, you would never find an angel investor investing in retail. Why? Because for retail you need a shop, you need people, you need inventory. It's a very capital intensive business, very slow to grow in value, and ultimately it will sell on a pure financial model. So angel investors look for capital efficient businesses that can take a modest amount of money and preferably go all the way to exit. The big mistake a lot of people make is thinking it's a continuum, a funnel. So let me put it like this. In the United States, angel investors invest as much in money as VCs invest every year. The average investment of a VC in the United States is around about $6.25 million per deal. The average investment of angels in the United States, well, say an angel group rather than an individual, because that's the right comparison, is in the order of about 475 to 500K per deal. Right, so there's a more than 10 times difference. So that means that if it was a funnel, the angels are throwing away 99% of their investments because they're not going to get VC funding. There are only certain types of businesses that are appropriate for VC funding, and only certain types of businesses appropriate for angel funding. Because angel is earlier in the life cycle, there's a lot more businesses that could fit the angel model. And because angel investors are private, and while we have expectations, we can be very flexible. So I stayed in a business for 10 years. Would I have liked to get out in 4 years? Of course I would. But it wasn't ready yet, and it was still growing, and it was still doing well. So you let it ride. If I was a VC, I would have to kill that business because I'm measured on my internal rate of return, the time cost of the money. So any business that isn't doing, which way are you? Any business that isn't doing that, right, going up to the high performance, you actually have to kill it, or at least get it out of your portfolio, sell it to somebody else at a bargain basement price, because the longer a low performing or negative performing business is in your portfolio, the harder it is for you to meet your hurdle of performance. Angels don't have that. So angel portfolios have on order of somewhere between 90 and 98% survival rate. Right? That means companies stay alive in the portfolio because we don't have to kill it off. Now sometimes we should. I have one particular one I would love to kill off if I could convince all the other investors to kill it, only because it's been dead for several years, and I just prefer to take the loss, put it into my tax statement, and move on with life. And that was an unfortunate one because the entrepreneur turned out to be a rather bad person. And the co-investors outside the angels turned out to be rather bad co-investors. So there are a lot of dangers when you're an early stage investor. So what does that mean for you guys about understanding how to approach angels and what we're looking for? Look, like I said, you can talk about it from an angel group point of view. Individuals will always be much more varied, but an early stage investment at the angel stage, at the sort of seed stage is sometimes the term that's used. you should be expecting not much more than $500,000 at the most in a round. That doesn't mean there won't be more money later if you perform. But it's also because if you're pre-revenue, your business is by definition worth nothing. There's lots of arguments about how you might value it. Your wonderful discounted cash flows about the net present value of your future cash flows is a very interesting set of data and worth having. It is not the definition of the value of your business. The value of your business, as it is always, is in the, it's beauty in the eyes of the beholder, value is in the eyes of the market. Right?
So these, just to try and sum up these, you want to see a strong team. You want to see someone that's got a big vision that's going to make you 10 times your money.
Yeah. So, all right. We like most other people who you talk to these days, we want to see at least a 2-person team. We don't want to see a solo player because there's no scalability there and a lot of risk. We want to see a founding team who will listen to what we have to say, because remember, we're proactive investors, we want to get involved. That doesn't mean you have to do what we say all the time, because we're not going to be right all the time. But we want to know that you're coachable, that you'll take the benefit of the experience we've got to share, and that you'll take our insights into your consideration. That's very important to us. Angels have lots of ways of testing for that. One of them is the conversation about, you've got a really good idea, you're doing a good job of starting right now. What happens if this really works the way you plan? And in 2 years from now, you've got to step aside and we hire a CEO. Right? If you arc up and say that's never going to happen, then we probably decide at that point you're not the sort of person we want to work with. You could be, but just keep in mind that is by far the exception. That the Bill Gates and Larry Ellisons of this world are by far and away the rare exception of someone who takes a business from inception all the way through to huge success. It's much more common that leadership changes every couple of years as the phase of business changes and the needs and the skill base of the CEO change, leadership change. Even if you look at Steve Jobs, he didn't lead Apple all the way to success. He helped get it started, then he got booted out, then he had to go at Next. Sort of worked, sort of didn't work. Then he did a couple of other things, like Pixar, and then he got back, right? And then when he came back, he definitely led it through that next huge growth phase, no question of that. But he didn't actually lead the company the whole way, and he didn't have the skills at the time to do it. So getting kicked out, many would argue, was the best thing that ever happened to him. So what else do we need? We want to see that you're really solving a problem. We prefer that you actually have something other than just business model innovation. So what do I mean by that? So this whole rash of taking retail online, there's no doubt that people can make a lot of money at it, but it's very hard to figure out who's going to buy it. As an investor, the very second question I ask myself is, who's going to buy this? So the second question, because the first question is I ask you, what do you do? Right? I have to know what you do before I can imagine who might buy it. And when I imagine who might buy it, I have to imagine what value you're creating. My preference is you're going to create what we call strategic value. I don't want to know that you're going to, in 5 years, that your whole deal is that you're going to have $20 million in revenue and $4 million in profit. I mean, that's nice and that's great and that's what it should say. But the real opportunity, going back to what I said before about how businesses get sold, I don't want to sell on the financial formula that someone's going to pay me 4 or 5 times the performance that's been averaged over the last few years. If you follow that route, you're on a 10 to 15 year journey to an exit because you have to build a massive financial performance. Yes, lots of examples that you could think of right now of companies that have done that faster, but when you put that in the context of the whole universe of companies, they are far and away the exception. Tiny, tiny exception. That's why you know about them, right? Because they made the news, the international news. So we're looking for strategic value, and strategic value is generally more easily generated when you actually have something, some intellectual property of some sort that is actually distinguishable and can be exploited by a larger company far more effectively and efficiently than you could do that. So that's, I mean, now there are lots of debates about that, and again with angels, it always depends, right? So had I been around and connected to the guys at SitePoint when 99 Designs was born. Would I have invested, given that in one sense you could argue 99 Designs doesn't have that IP I was talking about? I don't know. I didn't know those guys in those days. Right? I know some of them now. I mean, I've met Jason before, but I know Lenny reasonably well. I did know the people who started some of the other big successes in Silicon Valley at the days when they were getting started. Would I have invested in them? Again, it's hard to say. I don't like hindsight because, of course, you always have 20/20. But it's a lot easier to envisage success when you've got something, some kernel of value, than it is to envisage a success that's just a race to volume. Because a race to volume is two problems. One, you may not win, and two, even if you win, there may be no value in it to anybody else. So you're stuck running that business for a long time. So I mean, I met with someone today, they have exactly that model. They want to build a new online shopping solution. It sounds like it could work, it sounds like it could make them good money, but there is nothing, they have no value in their business because all they're going to do is essentially be an advertising channel for all the people who actually have product to sell. And the problem with advertising is it's fad driven. As soon as the fad of that style of interaction or that style of advertising goes away, what value is there in that business? So they went away going, wow, we'd never thought about it that way before. We got so focused on what we thought was a good user experience and getting the technology executed. And by the way, that's the whole point. Angels actually expect that most entrepreneurs aren't going to really know what an exit is or what it looks like. That's a big part of what we expect to be able to bring to the table. We require of the person we put on the board of a company that part of their job in the boardroom is to be the custodian of exit strategy, that they make sure exit strategy remains part of the business's strategic planning and development process, because we want the founders to be totally focused on actually growing the business, growing the value of the business by doing the hard yard work.
I'll stop you there for 1 second, and I'm going to take just one question, and then yep, go ahead, sir.
Jordan, there's a recent PricewaterhouseCoopers report which talks about early stage startups adding about $109 billion to the Australian GDP over the next 20 years, by 20 years. How much play does what you do as an angel investor or as an angel investor head is going to lead into that, and how does that help us as startups then actually think about not just now the next two years, next 5 to 10 years out?
So the question, I'm not sure you all heard it, so let me just tell you. The question is about a recent report from PwC that said $109 billion of value would be contributed to the economy over the next...
No, by
2033? By 2030, so over the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Right. But when you say by, you don't mean per year.
No, that's not a cumulative, that's 109, 20 years
in that year.
In that year.
So, okay. So companies that are started today will, in 20 years, in that year, be contributing $109 billion of revenue to the country, allowing for inflation and all that sort of stuff. And what role do I think angels are going to play in driving that to happen?
Or how can you better make that happen?
I think, given the opportunity, angels will have a huge influence on that. When I say given the opportunity, Australia is pretty much the only place in the world that I know that has an angel community that gets no support. Gets no support through government, gets no support from the corporate sector. You might think that sounds kind of funny. Why would a bunch of people with money want support? Well, so the best support that I know of happens in the UK, where there are fantastic tax incentives that encourage people to invest in early stage companies. So, just to be really clear, the net effect of this kind of support for angels is that more companies get funded, and then by definition, therefore, there'll be more successes. And if it's done by supporting the angels and not directly supporting the companies, not having handouts to the companies, then what you're doing is you're buying the higher contribution the intellectual contribution. So the chances are not only do more companies get funded, but more companies succeed better than they otherwise would have done. So various countries around the world have various models of how they do it. In the United States, it's mostly done through the corporate sector, who have very positive dispositions. So this comes back to the cultural issues you're talking about. So I think without any of that, I think angels will have a very significant influence. That's why I still have 2 full-time unpaid roles to make the angel world happen in Australia. With support, with collaboration, with engagement with the rest of the community, which will require addressing some of our cultural issues. It would require having politicians who actually give a damn about the early stage space. Then I think it would be a huge contributor. I don't think institutional investment is going to have much to do with it at all. Not in terms of driving the front end of the activity. What we also have as a big gap though is what happens after angel level investing. What happens when you do need a $10 or $20 million injection, right? There's almost nobody in Australia who will do that. Some of the private equity firms are starting to diversify and do a little bit of that stuff at the sort of the bottom end of their world, and that's a good thing. But again, you have to look at the skill sets. They're very careful about what they do, and they should be, and that's appropriate. But there's a serious gap, and that is the gap that is traditionally filled in those 4 places around the world where VC works, right? Where you do a Series A of 10, 20, $30 million. That's what that's all about. And again, we're not unique. The vast majority of the world, the vast majority of the United States are in exactly the same situation, exactly the same problems, and that's why angel investing has taken off all around the world. That's why countries like Latvia and Estonia, Portugal, states like Hawaii, Ohio, these are all doing whatever they can to support and grow their angel communities. It's massive leverage. Whatever that support is, for every dollar of that support, you have an impact on the community that over time will be measured in tens or hundreds. When I say over time, that's usually in the order of 5 to 10 years. Early stage ecosystems take 20 to 30 years to build. That's just the reality. So if you're doing something that's not working, you need to stop and start doing something else because you don't have any time to lose. And right now, Australia is way behind. We have lots of people who want to do the hardest part, which is be the entrepreneurs. We have a few people who are willing to do the scariest part, which is take your hard-earned money and contribute it to that effort. And that's about it. We're missing all the other bits and pieces.
Right.
There's another question if you want to take it.
Let's take
more.
one more, sorry, one. Yeah.
Sorry, take it back. What you just said, I read in the magazine that actually this future Sikh party plan to create a Silicon Valley Australia between Canberra and Sydney, if I'm not wrong, if they win the elections. So they plan to create, as I haven't estimated the budget of the building of the city actually, they plan to make like 5 million people living here. It's like 1/4 of the Australian population, if I'm not wrong. So they would have to make a lot of people expatriate. Do you think it's a realistic project and it's going to bring something good to Australia?
So the question was that apparently there's been a proposal by the Liberal Party, is it? Okay, so it sounds like it was a proposal probably by the coalition, the Liberal National Coalition, to build a Silicon Valley between Canberra and Sydney.
I think it's none of the main 2 parties. It seems like it's
So anyway, someone just said they were going to do that. So the short answer is no, it's a crazy idea and it won't work.
Let's get it. So look, I'd like everyone to get on their feet once again. And thank Dorian Green for his time tonight.